Hello and welcome to another commentary track. This time I am inking a page from the recently released JUJU Rabbit in Escaped Eggs. This was a 4-page comic I did over the first half of fall, and it was inspired by the Cuphead video game, at least the art style was. The name JUJU Rabbit, it was a play on the movie JUJU Rabbit, which is starring Taika Waititi as Hitler, and this has nothing to do with that. I just like the name so much. So one of the cool things that you'll notice is that this is me inking in real time. The iPad has a feature that lets you record the screen, and so anything you do on your screen, whether it's working in apps or browsing on a site, it will record for however long you want. And so I thought it would be fun to show you what it's like for me to ink a panel in Procreate with my Apple Pencil in real time and show you how long it takes. I wish I was as fast as those time lapses, but I thought it would be fun to show this. And as you can see, I'm making quick work of the shape function, where if you draw a shape freehand and you push on the Apple Pencil, it'll snap to the shape that it thinks you want, which I'm working a lot with circles. It's a really great tool. It's very functional, and then you'll see here in a minute when I make the rest of this hair, I will use the fill, which is basically dragging the color that you have in your color selector over the shape, as long as the shape is closed. This is probably one of my favorite features because it makes filling in dark lines or dark whatever you want to fill in with black or any other color. It makes it really easy instead of just coloring over it. There's a purpose for doing it by hand, especially if you have different textured brushes. And that is one of the cool things about Procreate, is that it lets you custom your brushes. And since this program has been out for a while, there's a lot of artists, designers, typographists. Is that a word? I don't know. A lot of creative people have decided to play around with that feature and then create their own brush sets, and then you can pay for them and download them into your Procreate. So I'm actually using a brush set created by the illustrator and mural artist Justin Peterson. He used to be an artist for Mad Magazine, I believe, and he created this brush set that comes pretty close to real life art supplies. He also has a really cool ink fill that he has described as his Mike Mignola brush. So he uses it to ink some of his shapes with that brush, and it has a nice realistic texture to it, which is one of the benefits of filling in by hand instead of just using the fill tool, because you get different texture. It feels more organic as opposed to clean and digital, which is why I like this brush set. It feels like I'm using actual pens. I think I mentioned this before, but the comic is based off of the Cuphead art style, which is very 1930s cartoons. If I'm thinking more of like the era in which I watch cartoons, like a lot of Chuck Jones, Bugs Bunny stuff. So that's why JUJU Rabbit has the white gloves and the 3 fingers like the Mickey Mouse gloves. So as I wrap up this first panel, I stop recording, and then it's going to switch to the full time-lapse video from this point on, because Procreate has this feature where it will record every stroke, and then you can export that as a 30-second clip or a full-length version time-lapse, so everything is sped up. But I thought it would be interesting to show you my process, like the slowed down version, in real-time version of me inking a page. I'm very fond of the undo button, which is dangerous when you start going back to working traditionally, but the fact that I can just undo as many times as I want, it's almost kind of gross how many times I hit that little undo button. It's so helpful and beneficial. And I find when I start working traditionally again, I'm like constantly pinching the paper as if it's gonna make my lines bigger. So it's good to go back and forth, because if you do work digitally for a long time and you go back to traditional, it will take some getting used to. So bounce back and forth as much as you can. We are going to start to speed things up here, and it looks a lot cooler actually when it's sped up. The real-time inking is real boring, but I have a lot of fun doing it. All the panels I made by hand as well. I don't think Procreate has a create a panel feature, but doing it in the way of making like really big shapes, like rectangle shapes, and then cutting out what I don't need. What I do is like I'll fill it with black, then I'll make a copy of that and put it over it, and then shrink it and try to get a nice clean edge around. So I had to work Jerry the giraffe in here somehow, and I thought he would make a funny cameo as a prize that Esther Bunny would give Juju for finding the hidden Easter eggs. Even though we don't call them Easter eggs, but she is the Esther Bunny. Her name is Esther, and I really like the look of her, even though she ends up being kind of a monster and mischievous. But when I was drawing and designing her with the pantsuit and the giant bow tie and the white gloves, she came off looking a little Janelle Monáe-esque, and I was like, oh, this is as if Janelle Monáe was an Easter Bunny. How funny. You can see me working on some backgrounds here at the bottom. Originally, I wanted to paint them with an acrylic brush or a watercolor brush without like heavy black lines, because that's the way they look in the video game, is that the characters are very cartoony and then the backgrounds look like oil paintings. But I wanted to be able to make sure I hit the deadline, so I just made the backgrounds similar to the style of the characters. And Dark Horse actually put out a Cuphead comic that had a bunch of short stories, a collection of short stories, and they were drawn in this style, the 1930s style, but even the backgrounds were drawn this way. They weren't painted like in the video game. So I think it still worked, and I still got the effect off, and it was actually a lot quicker than I expected. And then as we get to the last bit here where we work on the color palette, I wanted to go for Easter colors, very soft pastels, and then since I wasn't laying out any shadows for the main characters, it was just all texturing of the background. The page came together pretty nicely, and the whole comic came together pretty fast. I like the purple pantsuit for Esther. She comes off looking like Prince. I was very happy with how this turned out. It was originally supposed to be an Easter comic, but I was knee deep in Juju and the Hole in Space. But then I think with how the comic ends, it felt more like a Halloween comic, because everyone remembers their first time meeting the Easter Bunny and how terrifying those pictures came out. So I hope you enjoyed this, and we'll see you on the next one.